Welcome to Beyond Pipeline, where we talk about how to win the inner game of sales. My name is John Abush, and I'm your host. And I started this podcast because I believe that there is an opportunity for us to dive into more of the mental game within sales. There is tons of content out there about how to make a better cold call, how to close more deals, and how to actually fill your pipeline. But there's nothing out there about how to actually win the inner game of sales. And that's why I'm creating this by talking to some of the best AEs that and for far as performance, but also just best humans that I know within our industry and sharing what they do to win their inner game. And today we have a very special guest. He's a top performing Salesforce AE. He's the host of Sales Stories in Real Life, where sales folks are buyers themselves. And he has the greatest hair potentially in software sales. Without further ado, Alex Bruschi. What's up, brother? How are you?
John, thanks for having me. I'm really glad we get to do this. Appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, of course, man. Of course. I hope I spoke well to sales stories in real life. I know that things kind of taken off for you. So if you want to add anything more to that, feel free to. But I hope I at least spoke to it decently.
Yeah, no, you did a good job. For anybody who's listening that wants to take their sales game to the next level, the thought process behind the show is that as salespeople, we're often fed a lot of sales tips, but not very often are we instructed to think like a buyer. And I fundamentally believe that the more we put ourselves in the shoes of a buyer, the better we can sell to buyers by better understanding their circumstances. So it's been a fun project.
Awesome. And you've had a lot of great guests on. You have gotten a lot of listens and obviously gained a lot of trust in the sales industry. So kudos to you for that. And this is honestly, I think kudos to you. You pushed me to get started on this. This is episode number 1. I think as viewer, if you're watching this, I didn't know what to do with my hands here. We're gonna figure all that out throughout all of this. We're gonna figure that out. I was like, what am I doing here? But here we are. So with that said, let's just start here. How'd you get started in sales?
Yeah, so funny story, actually. So this is back in 2013, 2014, about a decade ago now. I had just, very, very fortunately, had just done a study abroad, experience in Barcelona. It was by far the most impactful thing that I've ever done in my entire life. Came back to America and was a semester away from graduation. And I realized I did not have an internship and I needed to find one quick. Oh, shoot. I gotta get on this. So I ended up finding an internship at a company, called, let's just say X Financial Group. I was like, okay, I'm good at numbers, right? Like I like math. I'm pretty good at statistics in particular. And, I like money. I like how money works. I like how money grows. Let me give it a shot. And, I had no idea what we did for the first month. I was just kind of blending in, not really candidly doing too much. And then turns out it was a life insurance firm that was up the street from where I was going to school at the time. Fast forward a couple months, a month or two down the line. And I remember I kind of told my boss, I'm, pretty fairly broke college student, like most of us. And I was kind of like, I really want to start contributing more and making some money. What can I do? And I'll never forget his face. He just chuckles and he reaches into his drawer and just throws me this stapled stack of papers. And he's like, make meetings. And I'm like, okay. So I just call these people and make meetings. It was the first time I'd ever thought of the concept. So it was a list of old recycled leads, basically. And I ended up calling this list all night, made 5 meetings. And I was so just clueless and just raw that I walked into his office at the end of the night and I was like, I made 5 meetings, here you go. And all the dates, times, addresses, blah, blah, blah. And he nearly fell out of his chair. And I was like, is that bad? I had no clue. So that was kind of basically how it got started. I pretty quickly realized that I was very comfortable talking to people and very comfortable on the phone. Then that turned into me, getting paid, whatever it was, $20, $25 a meeting. And then it was more hey, we can, I started getting paid more per meeting. And then it was okay, well, let me get my license, right? And then I could be 50% on the deals. And then it was like I was buying my own leads, and then it just eventually turned into a short-ish stint in life insurance. And here we are, about a decade later, selling ever since.
Wow. It sounds like you obviously you kind of fell into it, and then you realized you had like a proclivity for sales. Then you kind of just grew from there. And it obviously kind of got you to where you are today.
Yeah. It was very much trial by fire. There
Yeah.
was pretty much like absolutely zero training. And one thing that was kind of cool too is I was probably the youngest person at the firm by maybe like in hindsight, maybe like 15, 20 years.
Okay.
And who was my manager, at the time, I remember when I ended up leaving because I was moving to California. He was like, I just want you to know that I am now like going to hire people out of college now, like
Good for you.
because of
Good.
you and like what you came in and did. So that was pretty cool. I hope they took a chance on some younger people from there on.
Yeah. I think a lot of people struggle when you say like when you also like taking a chance. Not only them, but also you. Like I feel like a lot of people struggle to take a chance, even like in their own jobs, or whether they want to start a side project or whatever it is they want to go do. Like,
Yeah.
and you really took a chance by asking for more responsibility. I feel like people so often have really struggled to ask for more responsibility. What if they fail? What if they have a hard time? What if they struggle? What if they experience challenge? Like, can you walk us through just what it felt like to ask for that responsibility, see yourself succeed, but also face challenge, like what that looked like as you progressed?
Yeah, I think in that circumstance, it was just kind of like a necessity more than anything else. It
Yeah.
wasn't this big, like pump up speech. It was just kind of like, I need money. It's
Mhm.
like, if you're hungry, you ask for food. Like if you need money, you ask for more responsibility. So I think like for folks that are listening at home, like one thing that you can really do to kind of calm your nerves on this, if you will, is that people want people that are go-getters, right? People want people that are aspirational and that are like looking for more. So even if you fail, you've succeeded because you have put yourself out there more than anybody else, right? Like there is really, obviously, I'm sure there are some exceptions, very, very, very limited downside to asking for more responsibility and just giving it your best shot. Most likely, the worst possible scenario is that you don't end up doing what you intended to and you learn how to do it better the next time, right? And then it's just slowly and steadily like growing any muscle, right? It's just failure, repetition. But then all of a sudden, months from then, years from then, you're probably going to find yourself doing way bigger things that you never would have expected possible for yourself. So I think and I'm sure we'll dive into this theme a lot throughout the episode,
Yeah.
is like just don't think of failure in the traditional term. Think of your outputs, right? Think of putting yourself out there. If you put yourself out there, you take ownership to a leader, you're only going to go up from there. You're only going to grow.
Yeah, I like this thread we're going on, so I want to go down it. Like, there's kind of two things I caught from that. One was failure. Another one was more like your worldview and your overall beliefs. I want to go down failure first. How do you? So often, I think we a lot of people, and I even have struggled myself with just like failure in life and taking risks because of how I define failure, and I had to get
Yeah.
really conscious. Probably sometime in my earlier mid 20s of like what failure actually meant to me, so I can take bigger risks. What does failure mean to you, and how has that definition of failure evolved as you matured in your career, just as a human being?
Yeah. So since we did the life insurance thing, I'll tell another quick story. So like when I was on my come up, if you will, I didn't know how to run my own meetings. I didn't know how to run my own sales cycles. I would buy my own leads. I would make a meeting and then another agent would help me close it and I would get 50%. One night I had a meeting in the Bronx. And for folks who know in New York, right? People in the Bronx are, they don't take no stuff, if you know what I mean. And it was like a bridge to get over there, right? Like it was gonna like cost me like probably 20, $30 just to get there between gas and bridge tolls. And I was supposed to do the meeting with my manager. He had something come up last second, and I had this meeting, and I was like, I'm gonna have to reschedule it, I'm gonna have to cancel it. Nobody was able to take his spot. And I just ended up going and running the meeting, even though I didn't know how to run a meeting. And surprise, it was freaking horrible. It was like the worst meeting ever. But then like the monkey had gotten off my back,
Yeah,
right?
dude.
Like, and then I never from that moment needed another agent to help me run a meeting again, right? And then I was making 100% of my own commissions from then on. So it's just one of those things where you never know how far you can push yourself unless you fail, right? Like I'll say that again. Like you never know how far you can go until you fail. Like that applies to sales. That applies.
Yeah.
I mean, the easiest example is weightlifting, right? If you're doing something 50 pounds and you can do it and you don't try 60 pounds, like how do you know you couldn't do 60, right? How do you know you couldn't do 70? How do you know you couldn't do 80? So I think it's one of those things where like you can't grow without failing. You can't.
I agree with you.
So it's a necessity in the growth process.
Yeah. So it's almost as if for you that failure is necessity in order to grow your skills and grow who you are. So it's really almost like a yeah, it's yeah, it's just a plain out necessity. Is failure a bad thing for you? Like how would you actually define it though?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, I'm sure that there are, maybe different types of failure, if you will. But like, I think it's a very nuanced subject
Yeah.
because, like, for example, like you and I talk about podcasting, right? Like, someone could put out a podcast that say like doesn't get as many views as they want to, and like they view it as a failure, but like a failure in podcasting is actually like you stop making episodes, right? Like so
Yeah.
long as your podcast exists, like you're not failing, right? So I think a big part of this that needs to be said is like, how are we managing our expectations? So like, what are your
Yeah.
expectations, right? Like
Yeah.
if you go into
Yeah.
anything with realistic expectations, you're really either just like you fail or you learn. Excuse me, you succeed or you learn, right? Like there's no fail. Like either you succeed and you did what you wanted to do, or you quote unquote failed, but you learned so much for the next time that you try to do so. So like consistent action
Yeah.
plus failure equals growth, right? Let's just
Yeah.
make up an equation on the spot.
I like that. I like that. You could yeah, you can copyright that. What what do you think makes people have such a hard time with expectations? The reason I say this is because like I feel like there are some camps where and I've even thought about this too, where it's like you should have really high expectations, right? Like set the bar really high, expect a lot, and like and go for it. And then some people are like, expectations are the enemy of all happiness or whatever, right? And so then there's this other way where people are like, don't have expectations. Like, where are you on? How do you think about expectations and how it applies to your work and to your life and how you view the world? I think that's just such a yeah, it's such a catalyst for or yeah, a catalyst for how people view life is through expectations.
Yeah, and this is I think where things start to get really nuanced is like what is your definition of expectations? Like expectations is like what do we expect, right? Like I don't look at expectations the same as goals,
Yeah.
right? Like expect is like if I don't get this or don't achieve this, like I'm going to be upset. Goals is like this is what I'm pushing for,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So like if my expectation is I'm going to set a meeting every day, that's different than my goal is to set a meeting every day, right? Like those are
Mhm.
two like very very different
Yeah.
concepts. So I think like what we really need to do is kind of separate those into their own camps of like, hey, these are my expectations as far as like what I expect from myself, and here are
Mhm.
my goals, right? Like those are two very kind of different concepts that we're working with there. So
Yeah.
like you can be aspirational but not hold yourself back from your own expectations. You can, kill yourself from your own expectations but not have high goals, right? Like so I think it's having the balance of like you're pushing yourself, you're being aspirational, you're a determined and driven person, but like you have fair expectations to where you're not beating
Yeah.
yourself, right? Like I think
Yes, dude.
that's I think that's where a lot of people fall short is their expectations actively defeat themselves, and that's
Yeah.
when it's not good for you.
And then they're gonna say, "Oh, I'm a perfectionist, so it's hard for me to do this, release this." And I don't maybe I should have more empathy, but like I laugh at that because I'm like, dude, like if you're a perfectionist, you just put it out. You just put out more stuff until you got better and better, right? It's like cold calling. Like, how many books you gonna read about cold calling until you start like making 1,000 dials, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, everyone is going to have their own way of thinking about things and their own way of learning about things. I most certainly am a learn by doing kind of person. Like, but then again, I do also think that like that preparation, like, of course, really helps. So again, like, I think like the overall theme is like we really need to be more nuanced about our takes
yeah,
and not just kind of like, well, if you're not pushing yourself, then you're not like going for it. Or like if you don't have high expectations, like you're not pushing yourself hard enough. Like I think we just like need to like slowly like pull things apart layer by layer and like
yeah,
really nuance the things that we're thinking and telling ourselves, like
yeah.
particularly when it comes to our career, our growth, right? Like we really need to handle those things delicately.
Yeah. I like where you're going with that. Let's talk about that. I know that when I say that, I mean more like self-talk, right? I know, especially now, I think read a stat that like 30% of reps are hitting quota or something like that. Some like low stat. And I think that having the nuance is a sign. If someone does a nuance, it's a sign of maturity and that they've probably done some inner work and just have some understanding of themselves and how to accurately view the world. Like, how do you deal with self-talk, especially when when things do get challenging, whether it's a bad cold call, a bad demo, a bad quarter, a bad year? Like, how do you deal with some of those things? It doesn't have to be even within sales; it could be within your greater life because I think it all plays into itself.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. The same themes kind of go across everything, whether
Yeah,
it's like sales or whatever, your personal life or your fitness, like your mental health, whatever it may be. I think for me, like one of the big ways that I would say like work on that is just like I think we need to like kind of like take a moment to realize that like our self-talk can either like push us forward or hold us back. Right. Like
yeah, I like
there's
that. I'm gonna
no
write that down.
yeah, there's no kind of real other option. Like there's no like neutral, right? Like it's either your self-talk is like helping you or it's hurting you. And so I think just like at the core, like we just need to kind of start off with the intentionality of like I want my self-talk to help me, right? And that's the key word there. I want because sometimes it's just like unavoidable, right? Like I think we all kind of have those days where like everything just like feels like cloudy and gloomy. And like on those days, it's more about like, let me just hold it together as best I can. Right. Like, I think the worst thing that people try to do is like, if you are in one of those bad spaces, like trying to like artificially create positivity out of that, like
Dude, yeah.
give yourself space for things to suck, like things are allowed to suck. Like things, in fact, are supposed to suck at certain points, right? Like I think rather than trying to like forcefully make ourselves positive, like sometimes those days
Yeah,
when everything just seems cloudy and everything just seems gloomy. And I mean, this happens to me all the time. Like there might be some days that I wake up and I'm like, how the hell am I going to hit my quota? And then like other days where I'm like, "Woo, this is going to be my best year yet, And it's like, could be the stretch of a few days. And so like on those days that it just feels like I don't see the path, like I don't know how it's possible, those are the days that our imagination can really hurt us, right? So like I think it's just giving ourselves the permission for things to suck. And this is one quote, like if I want to be known for one quote, like let it be this is like feeling bad for yourself. Excuse me. Let me redo that. Feeling bad and feeling bad for yourself are two very different things,
I like
right?
that.
Feeling
Yeah,
bad and feeling bad for yourself. Two very, very, very different things. Feeling bad, inevitability. We're all going to have days that we feel bad. Our outlook is bad. Our mood is bad, whatever the case may be. But when we're feeling bad for ourselves and you're just in that like sorry mood, right? Like you're just like complaining, right? And you're just
all done.
feeling
Yeah,
sorry for yourself. That's when things like really, really, really accelerate fast. So I think it's like keeping ourselves in the feeling bad place. It sounds silly, but like it's okay for things to feel bad. So going back to like the answer of your question is like I think we just need to give ourselves space to feel bad and not further bury ourselves from that and be able to, like, let's say you have a bad call, right? And it ruins a whole
Never
week.
happens, bro. Never happens.
Yeah. You just kill the whole week, right? If you have a bad call and you give yourself that hour, that half hour, that afternoon, that evening to feel bad about it, and then the next day you bounce back full force, right? That's kind of what it is. Like,
Yeah.
it's just limiting the downtime and
Yeah.
not letting it accelerate downwards faster. Again, with our imaginations, feeling bad for ourselves versus feeling bad, and just keep pushing forward as much as we can.
Yeah, I absolutely love that phrase. I wrote it down. Well, you had a couple really, really good zingers there, by the way. But feeling bad is different than feeling bad for yourself. In my life, when I have these like I'll call them principles, or maybe they're all general rules of thumb for my life. They usually come from experiences that were either challenging or hard that I needed to that I learned something from, or a mistake I made. Well,
Yeah.
was there experience that you had, or a moment that you had where you came up with that for yourself, with feeling bad, so feeling bad for yourself? Where did that come from?
I don't know if it was a specific uh, event, right? Or like a specific thing that happened. And I was like, oh, you know what? This is different than feeling bad. I think it's like I was like definitely raised strict from a young age. So like I kind of like got into this habit of like I know I need to be there for myself, right? Kind of thing. Like I know that I kind of need to be my own best friend, and I kind of know that like I need to be able to support myself. So I think that's just kind of been a theme like throughout my life of like,
Mhm.
okay, like I know that I need to take care of me, and kind of nothing can come in the way from that. And I think like coming up with the words is just like doing that inner work, right? So like let's run through that again. Like let's say you have a bad call, and maybe in the past that like kills a whole nother day, right? You're feeling bad for yourself for a whole nother day or even a whole nother week, right? Like, oh, that was my one chance to hit quota. And right, like we just kind of go and go and go. And it's like it kills a whole nother week. And that whole week you could have been finding
Mhm.
another deal. But like let's say that it's the way that I said it earlier. Like you have that 1 hour, those 2 hours, that afternoon, that whole evening, let's just say that like you just feel bad, right? Like having a bad call sucks, like you're not going to make yourself feel better by being like, let me smile because I just had a bad call. Like, no, like that's like that's gonna like actively make things worse, right? Because like
Yeah.
you're trying to fake it. Like, give yourself the space to feel bad. And you feel bad for however long that temporary period of time is, and you get up the next day and you get after it and you find another one, right? And you just kind of quickly realize, like, man, like the quicker you can kind of bounce back from that suck, the more opportunities you have to find something good again. So I think, like, again, it just comes back to that, like, exercising that muscle, right? Like,
Mhm.
failure, consistency, repeat, right? Like failure, consistency, repeat. And then once you've done it like enough times, it just totally changes the way that you think about failure, right? Like then oftentimes, like when you
Yeah.
fail at something, instead of it sucking, sometimes it might even be like, well, if I could bounce back for my next call at 3 p.m. and do that one well, then like it could save the day, right? So I think it's just holding on to that feeling bad instead of feeling bad for yourself.
Yeah, I like that. It's almost like mitigating the downside of emotions that are part of the human experience. In my own words, right? It's like how do you operationalize mitigating the downside of emotions that are going to come? And I like that's like giving yourself a window to feel what's that's something that caught me too, is you mentioned that, you were raised strict. So you had to like kind of learn to almost like help yourself navigate your emotions or feelings. Would you say that is accurate? And if it's not, that's fine.
Yeah, no, there's
Okay.
definitely some truth to that. Yeah.
Um, it sounds like that challenge and helped you to kind of I call what you were talking about is really like is a skill of like emotional management. Sounds like it helped you to really better manage your emotions through again what I said earlier. It's like you're like mitigating the risk of what I would call like maybe negative emotions spiraling.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And like maybe at its most like simplest form, like anytime you find yourself at a crossroads, like list out your options, right? Like that's one of the most classic ways to organize your thoughts is like list out all of your options and do a pros and cons analysis of each of those options, right? Like you have a bad call. Okay. I can like let this ruin the rest of my week, right? I can try and get back to it as soon as I can, right? Like you just literally list out every single option that's possible, do a pros and con analysis for every single one of those. By the time you're done, you're going to realize like, okay, this is what I need to do, right? So it's like keeping that sort of frame of mind of what's next, because when we're in the rear view, like you said, it can really quickly spiral out of control. But when we're just like, okay, like this happened and it sucks, but what do we do next, right? And how do we kind of continue going? And going back to your question earlier, like if you're someone who asks for more responsibility and you try something and it doesn't go well, like what's a manager going to prefer, right? Like someone who like tries to take on more responsibility and like fails and learns from it,
Yeah.
or like someone that's just on a treadmill, let's just say, right? And they just do the bare minimum and they show up every day, right? Like managers and leaders like want to see people that are like pushing themselves to take on more responsibility, right? So like I think that's like a huge thing that I really want someone to take away from today is like try and take that next step, right? It is better to try and take that next step and fail than just blend in and
Yeah.
do the bare minimum.
I think a lot of what you're talking about is like taking that next step. There's a lot of there's a lot of belief that one needs to well, so people would argue about with me about that, and I don't know if I would completely agree with this, but at some point you do need to have a belief that you can do that thing, or at least you can have some kind of successful outcome. I
Mm.
think one of the things that I've is I had the pleasure of getting to know you probably over the past couple months here. And one thing that you seem to have a lot of is just like belief in yourself and like what is possible. How did you always have that? And how do you develop belief, especially in challenging circumstances? Like, because I think a lot of people really struggle with having belief in themselves and what's possible for them. Right. And then maybe they also don't have any friends that believe in themselves very much either. So it's kind of this repeating cycle. So then yeah, like how do you develop a belief?
Yeah, I wish again, I wish there was like one thing that I could like point to and be like it was that. And there's really not, but like if I did have to try and single out one thing, like it goes back to that failure piece. Like I know that I hate the way this sounds, but like I think it's like really easy to like look at me and like, oh, Alex has a podcast, like he works at Salesforce, like he's
It's
doing
great
this and
hair.
that. Like last year, actually literally a year from pretty much almost today, like last year, April of 2023, I had just been laid off for the third time in like 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, legitimately, if I didn't get my job at Salesforce, I was maybe like a month or two away from like switching industries, right? And like, I don't know, selling cars, right? Like getting back to into insurance, like I don't even know, right? Like I was in that I'm feeling bad for myself space. Like it's not like I'm immune to it, right? Like
Yeah.
we can talk about all of these things and when we're in our good headspace, it's so easy to just be like, yeah, don't feel bad for yourself. But like when you're in that moment and like shit is real, I don't know if I can
Yeah.
curse on
Shit's
here.
different. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And like shit's real, like those are the moments where like you're really testing yourself. So I think it's just I've failed so many times that I've kind of exercised that muscle to not feel bad for myself as best I can, right? I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
I have those moments as well. I don't want people to think that like they should never feel bad for themselves or like they should never feel bad. Like we all have our slip ups, but again, it's just how quickly do you get back up after those slip ups, right? Like we all have our slip ups. And like here's an example that I'll give like David Goggins, right? I feel like everyone's like, "Oh my god, David Goggins like he's so tough, he's so this, he's so that." Like he has the same feelings of doubt and I can't do this that we do. The exact same. He just pushes through them, right? Like it's not like he has like numbed himself to like feeling like I can't do this. I got to quit this run, right? Or like I'm so tired, I got to stop. Like I guarantee you he still has those thoughts in his head every time. He just knows how to override it and push through it, right? So I think like that's kind of a common theme is like we're all going to get our asses kicked. Like we're all going to have those moments where we're down and we're out. The folks that get back on the horse the fastest are the ones that get the furthest in the long term. So to answer your question, I've just had my ass kicked so many times that at this point, it's like, again, it's just a muscle that grows, right? It's just fail, action, repeat, right? And you just get that callus, you get that muscle. I wish it was like a more like singular specific thing that I could say, but like people just got to like practice putting themselves out there,
I
right? Like
agree, dude.
make
There's really
like
no other
make
way. Yeah.
make some posts on LinkedIn that flop. You know what I mean? Like try and host a LinkedIn live, right? That 2 people show up to, like have those moments where like it feels like crap and then like rewire and like
Yeah. But dude, but then,
retool and go
yeah,
back.
yeah,
Just keep
yeah,
practicing that.
yeah.
Nobody remembers. Nobody remembers, right? Nobody knows about that post that you made that flopped, right? Like
Yeah.
nobody like remembers these like mistakes or errors the way you do. Like just keep going. That's it.
Yeah. And it comes back to like, I like your phrase, like get the monkey off your back. It's kind of like, gotta get the monkey off your back too. Cause then it's like, what if you don't do it? So let's say you sit on that idea or project or whatever it is for like, a year, 2 years, 10 years. And it's like, what happens then? It's like,
Here's another one. And this one's again, it's going to be like fitness sports related, but it's like really easy to understand. It's like if you're running a marathon, the best possible thing you could do is take one more step, right? Like the best thing you could do is go another point one. You know what I mean? Like doesn't matter if you're walking, doesn't matter if you're jogging, doesn't matter if you're sprinting, right? Like just like take another step, right? Like, and that's kind of like a metaphor for life, if you will. Like doesn't matter the speed, doesn't matter your technique, right? Or like just go another little bit. Like just go another little bit. Like life is a game of endurance. And like I think when we can build up that endurance muscle of failure, then that's when 6 months from that point, right? A year from that point, 2 years from that point. Like once you kind of get to that point where you're like, all right, failure is not going to break me, right? I'm just going to learn and I'm going to retool and I'm going to get back at it. When you get into that headspace, see where you're at a year later, see where you're at 2 years later, right? See where you're at 5 years later. You'll be astounded.
yeah. Yeah. I respect you for that. 'Cause you seem like someone that's very action oriented. Obviously you are, you've done some really, really cool things. I, I want to ask because I've been laid off before too. And I know how I dealt with that. A lot of people obviously been getting laid off in our industry, the SaaS sales industry, and just even beyond that. But
Yeah.
how did you deal with getting, and I've also been laid off multiple times too, not just once. How'd you deal with getting laid off? What do you do? What do you tell yourself? Like, can you help us understand that?
Yeah. So the first time it was more of like a furlough than a layoff. And that was just kind of like, okay, whatever. Like let's just, at that point, like I had savings, like I had a nest egg, and it was kind of like, okay, like let's just find the next thing. And then like the time after that, it was like, whoa, okay, this is like, this is getting exhausting, like this is kind of getting
Yeah,
to
it
me
is
here.
exhausting.
And like the third time, it was just like, am I even in the right, am I even in the right field? Like, what the heck am I gonna do next? Like, then it like really kind of started to spiral, and like then that was when like it was more financial stress, and it was the stress of like, well, I want to be like at this position, right? Like, I don't want to take a step down, or I don't really want to take a lateral step, right? Like, you kind of want to like always keep growing. And I think this is where it kind of like gets to the point of like, this is where you need to be an action taker, right? Like, folks are always going to want to raise their hand to bring action takers on their team. So, like, even if you've been laid off, like, even if you've been furloughed, like, whatever the case may be of like why you're out of a job or like why you're in a vulnerable position, let's just say, like, if you have established that you're an action taker and you're willing to put yourself out there, like someone's going to take a chance on you. Right. So, like, check this out. Speaking of podcasts, I started the podcast. I got laid off that third time. I had a Salesforce platform AE on my podcast. Shout out to Matt Binder. And when I got
Yeah.
laid off that third time, he was like, dude, you got to stop with these startups. You would crush it at Salesforce. I'm going to make you a referral. And I was hired like 3 weeks later. Right. So had I never started the podcast, chances of me being hired at Salesforce, I would say under 5%. Right. Like if. And so like even if you're in a comfortable position right now, like find some way to put yourself out there and build something that has your hands all over it, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a blog, whether it's a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly live event, right? Like
Mhm.
build something I think the point is like it doesn't have to make money. Like almost even better if it doesn't make money, right? Like think of it as like your resume. Like it's almost like your MBA project, right? It's like go out there and build something that like makes you different. I think that is something that, like, not only does it establish you as an action taker, but it just changes the entire way that you view everything because then the next time that you do get a sales job, right, like, you're gonna know how to think like a business owner better, right? When you're growing a
Yeah.
podcast, like, you gotta produce it, right? You've gotta market it. You've gotta distribute it. You've gotta find guests, right? Like, these are all skills that business owners need in one way, shape, or form. So, like, for that person that's listening, like, if you're down, like, if you're beat down, like, and you're, like, in a bad place, like, put that energy into something that you could build, right? Like, don't stop applying for jobs, like, keep doing it. I know it sucks. It's a shitty market out there. There's absolutely no denying that. But if you can have an outlet to put that energy into that also at the same time serves as like a living, breathing resume for yourself of like, you're not just saying like, I'm an action taker, I'm driven, like I'm inspired. Like invite the hiring manager on your podcast, right? Invite the manager at that company that you want to work at and invite them on your podcast, right? Like show, don't tell. That would be the biggest thing that I
Show
would
don't
tell
tell.
people. Show, don't
I
tell.
like that a lot. I think too that when you have these side projects, or it doesn't have to be, but just like when you have something that forces you to take action on a consistent basis, going back to the previous topic of like you build the muscle then, right? You build the muscle and you keep taking on, you keep getting those monkeys off your back and then the levels just keep going. I think that's so challenging for people to understand. Like I'll even give like like you know me for a bit, but when I was younger and even throughout high school and college, I used to stutter a good amount. Got better throughout college,
Yeah.
but what I realized is that when I would force myself to speak in group settings, like raise my hand in class or making a cold call out, not a cold call for like your tolerance for facing that type of like it can be pretty embarrassing where your tolerance goes up, and then you start to relax, and
Vulnerability.
then actually the stutter goes away, right? So, like, yeah,
When I say put yourself out there, what it really means is like make yourself vulnerable, right? Like make yourself vulnerable and it just introduces you to a whole new host of situations that force you to grow, right? Like I'll go back to me doing the podcast. My first two guests, More Asulin and Jen Allen, right? Like huge thank you to both of them for agreeing to do the show. I was so nervous during the entire podcast recording. I don't wanna, like, say this and, like, make you nervous now, but, like, it
I'm
felt
good.
like
I've already done that. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah,
it felt like there was, like, bugs crawling in my skin, like, the whole time, and I just remember, like, it almost, like, felt like I was, like, holding my breath the whole time, you know, like, "Okay, don't do something, don't do something," and I, like, I clicked stop record, and I literally leaped out of the chair, right? Like, I
yeah.
mean,
You're like, "Ah!"
you could ask either of them, right? Like, it was so nerve-wracking that I had to just, like, leap the second I, like, pushed record, you know? It was like I was just, like, holding it in, holding it in, holding it in, and then just, like, let it all out. And then 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, ninth, right, episode, I never did it again, you know? It's just
Yeah,
fail you know, like, and that's not even failure, right? Like, maybe let me
it
rephrase
is
this
though.
of,
It
like,
is because you do fail. Yeah,
vulnerable, consistency, and retool, right? Like, that's it. Like, do those things over and over and over and over and over again. Months later, years later, like, you will be so astounded with how far you've gotten.
yeah. I love the topics that we covered so far. We've covered like how you got into sales, like just the importance of taking action, upskilling, getting the monkeys off your back, how to deal with getting laid off, and then how you're using your network, you're able to get another job. Like, we've covered some really good things so far. Let's talk a little bit about sales stories in real life. This is a it's really as I experienced, it's really a podcast about being more buyer, more being having more buyer empathy as a seller, right? Which is what I really appreciate about it. At least that was my takeaway from it. Um, what inspired you to let's start here. What inspired you to even start that in the first place?
So this is a two-parter. Number one, I was at the time living in San Diego. My wife and I had moved into our apartment. It was like December of 2020 or so, right? It was like right in this window where like rent was like still really affordable. We had this like awesome rent deal. And it was what was it? It was August of 2022. My wife got a job in LA, so we had to move up to LA. Our rent went up $700 a month. And it was kind of like, I need to do something, like I need to forcefully level myself up. And so literally a month later, we moved in middle of August. I started the podcast September, and I just like knew that I had to put myself out there in a way that I never had before. And very much like you and I, when you and I had the conversation, you were kind of like, I'm ready to take the next step. I don't really know what to
Mhm.
do. And I was like, well, what about a podcast? So it's funny enough, this is our first weekend living in LA. It was our first weekend. And we go to a farmer's market and walking around the farmer's market. There are like a couple bakeries. For folks that know me, I'm a big foodie. There's no secret. So like I walk up to this bakery stand and right away the person's like, "Oh, how can I help you?" And it's the quick like, "Oh, I'm good, good." And, like right away, like you're just like on the defense. And so walk over to the next one. Let's just say they have the exact same pastries because it doesn't even matter. And I like walk up there, person doesn't say anything to me. I'm there for maybe like 2, 3 minutes just looking at pastries, right? Which doesn't sound like a lot, but like when you're counting to like 180 seconds and like you're
Yeah.
just standing there and someone's not talking to you, it's like a while, right? Like, and I'm just like falling in love with the pastries. I'm just like staring at all of them. And then the guy says something, I'll never forget it. He eventually is just like so matter of fact, like the tonality was just so perfect. He's like, "Did you find anything you like yet?" And I was just like, it just totally blew my mind in that moment of like, these two people tried to sell me on the exact same
Exact
thing,
same thing.
right? And one of them, I in 2 seconds was like, "No, I'm good," and walked away. And the other one, I ended up, whatever, buying like 3, I don't even remember exactly, 3, 4 pastries, right? Let's just say. And they were 2 people selling the exact same thing. It wasn't like one had a better product or one had a better location. It was identical. And one person got a sale, one person didn't. And like in that moment, it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks of like, salespeople could really benefit from hearing stories like this, when like
Yeah.
somebody was trying to make a buying decision and those like little tiniest nuanced things, you know what I mean? Like, had I walked up to that first place and he just given me 30 seconds to look at the pastries, like maybe I would have bought a pastry. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't just like, oh, don't ask people, like, can I help
That's
you?
such a good
Right. Like,
point.
because it's
That's a
a,
good point.
it's a kind thing to do, right? To ask for
Mhm.
help, to ask if you can help, to ask if you can support. But it's like, it was 2 seconds after I got there, right? Like, you walk up, "Can I help you with anything?" "No, no, no, I'm good," right? Like, and you're, like, right in combative mode already versus, like, letting me fall in love with the pastries a little bit, like, giving me
Yeah,
a little
develop a relationship with them. Yeah,
gi
yeah, yeah.
giving me a little bit of space, right? Like, and then the question was just, like, it was so perfect too when I think back to it. "Did you find anything you like yet?"
Yes.
Right? Like, every little piece of it was just, like, so masterful, and that was where the idea came from, and I knew, like, I'm like an ideas guy, like, I have, like, tons of ideas, and I had not taken action on many up until that point, they just kinda come and go, you just, like, talk yourself out of it, and I knew, like, okay, like, this is an idea that has legs, I really need to go for this, and I told myself, like, if I invite people onto the podcast and they say yes, like, then I've kinda signed my social contract, right? Like, now, like, my ego's involved, Now, like, if I bail out, like, they're gonna know that I bailed out,
Yeah.
So, like, I kinda need to, like, get my ego behind this thing, and so, yeah, I sent out a message to maybe, like, a dozen or so people, maybe, like, half to a third didn't reply at all. A handful accepted right away, and a handful of people were kinda like, "Oh, let me know when it gets going, and I'll do it." And that was history, You just keep going.
I love that. I love, I love that you like you kind of knew you had to push yourself too, which I really like. And I again going back to our original the previous thread of like taking action and finding a project to do so. How did you know that that was the times? I feel like a lot of people will have times where they want to push themselves, whether it's in their sales role or outside of it. Like, how did you know that was really the time that you really wanted to push yourself further?
It's a great question. I think it was both a combination. Again, I wish I'd better here, but it was just the number one, it was a gut feeling of, like I said, like I've had so many ideas before and they've kind of dissipated. And this one, like right away, it was like I knew it was unique, right? Like I mean, I still am big, sales podcast junkie. And this was September of 2022. And from then until now, pretty much the same is still like so many podcasts are just about like, here's a selling tip, here's a selling tip, here's a selling tip, here's a selling tip. Nothing about like, well, if you're talking to a buyer who,
Yeah, it's unique.
right, like
It's
it was
unique.
just so removed from the entire conversation that like right away it was just like, I know, like I know in my bones that this is both a really fucking good idea, and I know that nobody else is doing it, right? So, like, at the minimum, like, I'll have attempted something that nobody else has, right? Like, at the minimum, even if I try and even if I fail, and again, it goes back to the same thing earlier. The only way you fail is when you stop making episodes. I've had times that haven't released an episode in a month, in 2 months, right? But, like, just keep making episodes, Like, I think so many people wanna, like, again, goes back to the previous point too, it all ties together, like, put pressure on themselves, like the expectations of like, oh, I didn't put out an episode this week. I'm a failure, right? Like, no, like just put out another episode when you're ready. You know what I mean? Like no one like expects you to like put out an episode when you like have work to do. You know what I mean? Like being like a full-time salesperson at Salesforce comes first, but like when I could put out episodes, I put out episodes, right? So I think it was both a combination of like I really knew it in my bones that it was an awesome idea. And again, goes back to the point of like the expenses radically increasing very suddenly. Like I knew that I had to do something, like I knew that it wasn't going to be like an immediate smashing success, right? And then I was going to start like getting tons of sponsors and this and that. Like I knew that I just had to do something, right? And like at the barest minimum, like I have gotten so much better at discovery from being a
Yeah.
podcast host. And I'm sure like you'll realize the same. I've told you this many, many times before. Like I think prior to us taking the action, we like have a feeling of like, this is what I'm going to get out of it. And then when you actually take the action, you usually end up getting out so much more, but you just couldn't realize it yet because you hadn't taken the action
Got it.
yet.
Yeah.
So I think that's a huge thing too, is like you can think you know what benefits you'll see. Like, oh, if I do this, like this would be the benefit. There could be so many other benefits that are out there that you just don't see yet. And let that factor into your decision of making yourself vulnerable and putting yourself out there. Like you both can like fail more miserably than you thought, and you can both succeed much better than you think you could thought. Like, I think we mostly only consider one side of the coin when like give yourself the option to consider both sides of the coin. Like, what if it goes really freaking well? What if it goes awesome? What if it sucks? If the worst thing is, oh, I put in a few hours and made some podcast episodes and only a few people listen to it, so many worse things. So many worse things.
Yeah. Dude, I agree with you. You bring up a thread which I wanna kind of bring home is you mentioned consistency earlier, and I wanted to come back to it. I think part of like having a podcast and sticking with things is being consistent. And I think one of the hardest things for people to do, whether it's in sales or in life, is to be consistent. Like, how do you get yourself to be consistent with podcasts, showing up at work every single day? And you have like a great energy too. Like, you're not someone that is like a slouch. You get a great energy. How do you be consistent with all on a daily basis?
Yeah, and this is one of those things that like has kind of become one of my like mantras, if you will, is outputs over outcomes. That's it, right? Like focus on what you're outputting and like don't let it hinge on the outcome, right? And like I'll give an example for both sides. Like if you're like I told you, like if you make 21 episodes of a podcast, like that's already more than like 99% of other podcasts, right? So
Wow.
like don't focus on like how many views did I get on episode 10 and 11 and 12 and 20? It's like, no, put out 21 episodes, right? And then when you put out 21 episodes, put out another 21 episodes. And then after that, put out another 21, right? Like if you just focus on that and like don't burn so many calories about like worrying about the outcome, you will get so much further by like just, again, it goes back to the running thing, like just take another step, right? Like just make another episode, just write another episode description, just edit one more episode, right? Like just do one more marketing push, like just go one more 100 times in a row and you have 100 episodes, right? Like, I mean, it sounds kind of silly. So it's that coupled with just like, know like what you're missing out on if you quit, like
Dude.
outputs over outcomes. Like, and again, both ways. Let's say like you're a salesperson and you just get an inbound deal that just like falls in your lap, right? And you like have your worst call ever, but they end up buying because it was just a done deal. And, you just happen to be the person who picked up the phone. Like, you don't want to focus on that outcome, right? And be like, oh man, I was really shitty on that call and I got a deal. Like, let me do the same thing on the next call, right? It's like, focus on your output, right? Like, put your energy on the output versus the outcome and just continually be consistent and improve upon your output, and the results will eventually follow. Simple as that.
I like that because you're making the ask of yourself, not this big thing where it's like, oh, I got to do all episodes. So I got to make all these cold calls, do all these emails, do all this stuff. She's like, can I do like one more? Right. And then you get a little progress. Your brain goes, okay, it's like another one. All right. Another one. Right. And you keep going. I'm a big fan of Alex Hormozy. It's what he called like chunking down. So I like that concept a lot. I know he probably got it from you. So, he can, yeah, you can say thanks.
Us Alex has got to stick together.
Yeah, exactly. Let's bring this home. What is a lesson you've learned throughout? You've done a lot. What's a lesson you've learned throughout your sales career, throughout life that you want to leave the audience with? And it doesn't have to be sales related, right? Because I think again, it's all intertwined. What is one lesson you want to leave people with?
Yeah, instead of doing something new here, I'm going to repeat a lot of the same that I've said the whole time because I really, really, really want people to walk away with this is like, number one, like focus on your outputs over your outcomes. And like, number two, like just redefine how you see failure. Like if you can just get in that flow of be vulnerable, right? Retool and take action again and just do that over and 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 over again, like for infinity. I just can't like express how much you will like look back in the future and realize how far you've come. Like, and if you're having trouble getting in that headspace, like tell yourself, like, I'll use you as an example. John, let's pretend it's October 5th. It's April 5th right now. Let's pretend it's October 5th and you just did 6 months of your first podcast. What would you tell yourself today? Right? Like force yourself to get in that headspace of like, if I take action for the next, and the time frame doesn't matter. I'm choosing 6 months as an example. Like if I take action for X amount of time, what would future me tell me now, right? About like keeping going. And again, I'll give one more example. This is really relevant because I just posted sales stories in real life to Spotify. And I went back and had to like listen to a lot of the earlier on episodes.
Oh, it's so painful. Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah. And I'm like, what was I doing? What was I doing? This was so bad, right? But then like you think of the other flip side of it and you're like, I've grown so much, right? Like my spacing, my intonations, I'm using less filler words. I'm a better listener. I ask better questions. So it's like you can look at the same situation and see two different things. Like you could see like, oh, God, I sound so stupid, or I sound so this, or I sound so that, or like, should I redo it because it's so bad? Like, or like, wow, I can't believe how much that made me grow now. So like just kind of use that as fuel to like make yourself vulnerable, take the action, retool, and do it again. Do that over and over and over again.
That's a great formula.
And report back to me.
Make yourself vulnerable. What was it? Make yourself vulnerable, take action, retool, and repeat.
maybe instead of retool, learn. So make
Yeah, I
yourself
like that.
vulnerable, take the action, learn, repeat.
I like that. I like that. Over and over again. It's a
Like a
big
cycle.
cycle.
Like a cycle.
Awesome. Well, Alex, thank you. I know I have learned a lot today. I have a ton of notes right here. And just, dude, thank you for your great energy, for being a positive influence in the world, dude. Seriously, you've got great energy. You have a lot to give. So thank you. And
Much appreciated. This is a
yeah,
blast.
man,
Thanks for
dude,
having me.
this has been awesome, of course. And for the audience out there, please use what you've learned here, what you heard from Alex. Take action and help someone today. Awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Cheers.